Welcome back, everyone. Today, we have a truly fascinating explainer lined up for you, and I am so excited to get into it. We are stepping straight into the absolute heart of high-stakes magical combat to break down a thrilling, beautifully complex tactical battle. If you've been following the source material, you already know the intensity of the situations these characters find themselves in, but today we are looking specifically at the incredible trial known as the Crucible of Wind. We are going to meticulously unpack this fierce clash between Mitsuki, who you might also know as Selene, and the incredibly intimidating Eternal Titan herself, Tempest Roma. Now, I want to be clear right off the bat. This isn't just a standard physical brawl where two characters just throw energy at each other until someone falls down. No, this is an absolute masterclass in elemental acclimatization, deeply layered psychological warfare, and on-the-fly tactical adaptation. Throughout our breakdown today, we're going to decode the brilliant hidden mechanics of this fight. We'll be looking closely at how these two combatants utilize spatial awareness, how they manage the grueling drain of stamina, and how even the simple, unconscious act of breathing becomes a literal life-for-death mechanic to gain an edge. It is a wildly creative combat system, and there is so much to unpack here. So grab a snack, settle in, and let's dive right into this.
I want you to think about this question for a second. How do you defeat an opponent who controls the very air you breathe? Seriously. Put yourself in that situation. This is the central, terrifying problem Mitsuki faces the very second this trial begins. Tempest Roma isn't just throwing gusts of wind around. She is actively integrating zodiac systems, she is unsealing her limiters, and she initiates a terrifying state called Mode Raptor. So, what does Mode Raptor actually mean in a practical combat sense? Well, it means Tempest Roma materializes these massive, feathery wings and immediately takes to the air. Instantly, the entire dynamic of the battlefield shifts. Tempest Roma gains an absolute aerial advantage. Think about the geometry of the fight now. Her range, her angle of attack, it instantly becomes infinitely wider than Mitsuki's. Because of this high ground, standing still for even a fraction of a second is an absolute death sentence for Mitsuki. She is grounded, completely exposed, and facing down an opponent who not only has the supreme high ground, but can literally weaponize the atmosphere pressing against her skin. It is an incredibly oppressive starting point for a trial.
So that brings us to Section 1, the Crucible of Wind, establishing the aerial threat. Let's see exactly how Tempest Roma weaponizes that atmosphere to create an immediate, high-pressure test of survival right out of the gate. Picture this. Hovering high above the battlefield, Tempest Roma simply inhales deeply. She draws in this gentle wind within the crucible. But then, with a single, sharp exhale, she unleashes a fierce, absolutely relentless rain of wind blades that strike downward from every conceivable direction. It's a sensory overload. Now, Mitsuki actually manages to survive this initial devastating onslaught, and she does it by heavily relying on a technique called zone perception. You see, Tempest Roma isn't trying to mask her presence. She's being overt. So Mitsuki uses this sensory technique to literally read the projected trajectories of the incoming attacks. Instead of just panicking and running blindly, which would get her shredded instantly, she is executing swift, highly calculated evasions. She's finding the micro pockets of safety in a literal storm of blades. But here's where it gets really interesting. While she's dodging, Mitsuki realizes something absolutely crucial. This specific pattern of attack, it feels familiar. It closely mirrors the combat techniques of Concordia, someone Mitsuki has trained with extensively during her Dream Knight field missions. That detail is so important. It's this exact prior experience, this muscle memory from sparring with Concordia, that allows Mitsuki to quickly map the chaotic battlefield in her mind and survive the opening barrage. If she hadn't put in that work in the field, this trial would have been over in 5 seconds. Moving right into Section 2, the stamina trap, the psychology of evasion. Because here is the thing. Mitsuki thinks she is managing her stamina perfectly in this moment, but actually, she is walking directly into a beautifully orchestrated psychological trap. Okay, let's break this down. Having survived that harrowing first wave, Mitsuki makes what seems like a very sound tactical decision. She needs to conserve her energy, so she purposefully slows her breathing down. She decides to rely heavily on her zone perception to guide her, and she makes a rule for herself. She will only burst into maximum speed at the exact final moment of evasion to save her strength. Makes total sense, right? But the true depth of Tempest Roma's strategy goes so far beyond just trying to cause physical damage. Tempest Roma is basically playing 4D chess up there. She is actively calculating the absolute minimum distance she can maintain between each and every falling blade without their paths interfering with one another. Why is that important? Well, think of it like this. If the blades don't hit each other in midair, there are no gaps. There is no disruption. By preventing blade interference, Tempest Roma minimizes the time between impacts to practically zero. She forces Mitsuki into a state of rapid, continuous evasion with absolutely no time to stop and catch her breath. None. Mitsuki genuinely thinks she's pacing herself efficiently, but Tempest Roma is actively, mathematically bleeding her stamina dry. And the most insidious, terrifying layer of this strategy? It isn't just to make Mitsuki tired. It's to force predictable, low-risk instincts. Tempest Roma is literally using sheer physical exhaustion as a tool to hack into and control her opponent's mind. To really understand this, we have to look at Tempest Roma's core philosophy. She operates on this one fundamental principle. When one has little time to think, instinct naturally leads one to take the actions that require the least risk. I want you to really absorb that. As Mitsuki's zone perception starts revealing the pattern of the attacks, she realizes she isn't just dodging random strikes. Tempest Roma is weaving a literal geometric cage made of blades of wind, all around her, systematically shrinking her room to maneuver. Now put yourself in that cage. You are physically exhausted, you are completely trapped, and you have fractions of a second to react to a deadly projectile. What do? You don't try a risky backflip, you don't try anything flashy, your brain won't let you. Human instinct takes over, and you instinctively do the safest, lowest risk, easiest movement possible just to survive the next literal second. And because those low-risk moves are so severely limited by the cage of wind, they become entirely predictable. Tempest Roma doesn't even have to aim anymore. She just has to anticipate the absolute safest action within Mitsuki's incredibly narrow range of options, and she knows exactly where Mitsuki will step before Mitsuki even decides to step there. It is brilliant. Mitsuki's own biological survival instincts are being weaponized to map out her own downfall. All right, let's jump to Section 3, Sinking the Breath, a magical eureka moment. Just as this oppressive cage is closing in on her, Mitsuki discovers something that completely and utterly shifts the dynamic of the trial. Pushed to the absolute brink, Mitsuki takes a desperate, deep breath, just trying to revitalize her burning muscles. And when she does, something incredible, something totally unexpected happens. Tempest Roma's exact thoughts, that very philosophy about human instinct and low-risk actions that we literally just talked about, suddenly flow directly into Mitsuki's mind. It's like a telepathic radio station just tuned in. Reacting quickly, Mitsuki activates her sense of intuition to try and understand this bizarre, magical anomaly. And when she looks, she sees it. It is a stunning realization. Her own lungs and Tempest Roma's lungs up in the sky are visibly glowing with a brilliant, pulsing green light. Their breaths have momentarily completely synced up. But the true eureka moment isn't just the mind reading. It's what this biological synchronization reveals about the fundamental mechanics of the enemy's attacks. Mitsuki notices that the breath inside Tempest Roma's glowing lungs is the direct physical power source keeping those massive wings aloft. And even more importantly, this is the key, the deadly blades of wind only ever launch whenever Tempest Roma exhales. Boom. She has found the rhythm. She has found the opening. What felt like a continuous, overwhelming, inescapable cage of wind actually has a very real physiological limitation. It is fundamentally bound by the human body's absolute need to breathe. Which brings us to Section 4, Taking Flight, the counterattack. Having figured out the rhythm, Mitsuki realizes that to survive a cage built entirely on predictable instincts, she is going to have to completely break the rules. Think about the logic here. If Tempest Roma's entire flawless strategy relies on forcing her opponent to make predictable, low-risk moves, Mitsuki knows the only way out is to execute a high-risk, highly unpredictable countermaneuver. She has to do the exact opposite of what her instincts are screaming at her to do. Let's walk step by step through this incredibly explosive counterattack. Step 1. Just as a lethal wave of blades is about to hit, Mitsuki completely ignores her instinct to dodge away. Instead, she performs a sharp 180-degree turn while inhaling deeply, quickly calculating the absolute shortest, most direct path straight toward her opponent in the sky. Step 2. She exhales sharply, perfectly matching that elemental trigger she just learned from syncing their breaths, and she lunges into the air like an arrow fired directly from a heavy bow. She coats her arms in wind magic to aggressively deflect the oncoming blades, literally carving a tunnel right through the storm directly to her target. Step 3. Up in the air, Tempest Roma easily evades the physical lunge, but Mitsuki doesn't fall back down. For the very first time, without relying on the aid of her usual lunar gravity powers, Mitsuki manifests her very own wings from her back. She struggles against the wind for a chaotic second, but then she catches it. She regains her balance. She actually begins gliding through the air, actively analyzing her opponent from this brand new aerial vantage point. It is a massive, triumphant breakthrough for her character. And that leads us into our final section today. The final lesson: gamble versus recklessness. The explosive action on the battlefield pauses right here, as Tempest Roma descends to deliver a very harsh, sobering tactical truth. Up in the air, Mitsuki is understandably feeling pretty confident. She playfully points out to her teacher that relying so heavily on enforcing those least risky moves was ultimately her undoing. But Tempest Roma immediately shuts that down and points out a very heavy, very dangerous reality. She tells Mitsuki, "If you could read my thoughts through our synced breath, I could do the exact same thing to you." Tempest Roma explains that charging an aerial opponent, especially when you are not fully accustomed to flight yourself, is incredibly, incredibly dangerous. This is the absolute crux of Tempest Roma's lesson. Let's look at this comparison. On side A, we have what just happened in reality, a fortuitous gamble. Against a teacher like Tempest Roma, in a strictly controlled trial setting, that high-risk lunge worked. It forced a breakthrough. But Tempest Roma isn't satisfied with luck. She projects a terrifying, incredibly vivid illusion into Mitsuki's mind to show side B, fatal recklessness. She shows a stark image of exactly what would have happened if Mitsuki had tried that exact same sloppy, forceful lunge against enslavement, a horrifying evil soul that was once sealed by the Stone of Wind. In this projection, the illusion of enslavement easily sidesteps the lunge, and because Mitsuki used too much raw force to launch herself, a direct side effect of not actually knowing how to fly properly, she severely overextends her momentum in the air. She is wide open. And before she can even attempt to regain her balance, the illusion shows enslavement brutally impaling her from behind with a massive talon. It is a chilling, jaw-dropping moment. It brilliantly and terrifyingly illustrates that in high-level magical combat, there is a razor-thin, almost microscopic line between a lucky, heroic gamble and a fatal, amateur mistake.
However, despite that incredibly harsh lesson, and despite the glaring tactical openings she left during her wild lunge attack, the outcome of the Crucible is ultimately a success. Trial passed. Tempest Roma officially disengages Mode Raptor, floating back down to the ground. She explains to a very relieved Mitsuki that the core purpose of this specific trial wasn't actually to achieve flawless, unbeatable combat perfection on the very first try. That was never the goal. The real goal was to acclimatize Mitsuki's body and mind to the element of wind residing within them. And by successfully reading the air currents with zone perception, by sensing those intricate blade trajectories, by syncing the elemental breath with her opponent, and finally, by manifesting her own wings and sustaining flight, Mitsuki proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that she could host and utilize the element. She faced the pressure cooker, she adapted, and she officially passed the Crucible.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, thought-provoking question to really ponder. In a battle of instincts, are your safest moves actually your biggest weaknesses? As Tempest Roma so brilliantly demonstrated today, a truly skilled tactician won't always try to just overpower you with raw strength. Sometimes, they will simply cage you in, they will apply pressure, and then they will just wait for your own deep-seated instinct for safety to make you perfectly, mathematically predictable. It completely forces us to reevaluate how we view combat. It makes us realize that sometimes true survival requires the sheer willpower and awareness to actively override our deepest, most primal survival instincts and take that wildly calculated leap right into the unknown. It is exactly this kind of brilliant, deeply psychological combat strategy that makes analyzing these systems so incredibly rewarding. Thank you all so much for joining me for this breakdown. I really hope you enjoyed diving into the tactics of the Crucible of Wind as much as I did.